The auctioneer's laughter echoed through the dusty town square of Redemption Creek, Colorado, on that sweltering July afternoon in 1876, a sound so cruel and mocking that it made Eleanor Whitmore's blood run cold even as tears streamed down her round cheeks. She stood on the auction block, humiliated beyond measure, as the slender man in his fancy Eastern suit pointed at her with his gavel and declared to the gathered crowd that no man would bid on a woman of her considerable size, not even for her deceased father's valuable homestead that came with her hand in marriage. Eleanor had known this day would come eventually, though she had prayed against it with every fiber of her being. When her father, Thomas Whitmore, had died 3 months prior from a fever that swept through the mining camps, she had discovered the devastating truth buried in his papers. He had gambled away nearly everything, and the only way to settle his debts was through this archaic arrangement. The creditors had insisted that she be auctioned along with the property, as was still legal in some of the rougher territories where law and civilization had barely taken root. At 24 years old, Eleanor had never expected to find herself in such a degrading position, standing before the entire town like cattle at market. "Come now, gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, his thin mustache twitching with barely suppressed amusement. "Surely one of you needs a cook or a housekeeper. The property alone is worth a considerable sum. 200 acres of prime land, a sturdy cabin, and access to the creek. All you have to do is take the woman as your lawful wife." He paused, looking directly at Eleanor with disdain. "Though I understand that is quite the burden to bear." The crowd erupted in laughter, and Eleanor felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She had always been a large woman, even as a child. Her mother had passed during childbirth, when Eleanor was only 7, and food had become her comfort through the lonely years of growing up in the wilderness. Her father had loved her dearly despite everything, but he had also been a dreamer and a gambler, always certain the next card game or the next mining claim would make their fortune. Instead, it had brought them to ruin. "Please," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible over the jeering crowd. "Please, this is not right." "Not right?" The auctioneer, a man named Silas Cunningham who had traveled from Denver specifically for this sale, sneered at her. "What's not right is your father's debts going unpaid. What's not right is thinking you have any choice in this matter, girl. Now stand up straight and try to look presentable, though I know that's asking quite a lot." More laughter rippled through the assembly, and Eleanor wanted nothing more than to run, to disappear into the mountains and never return. But where would she go? She had no money, no family, and no prospects. The law, such as it was in this rough territory, was on the side of the creditors. She was trapped. That was when she heard it. A sound like thunder rolling down from the peaks, except it was the measured tread of heavy boots on the wooden planks of the general store's porch. The crowd parted instinctively, and Eleanor looked up through her tears to see a man unlike any she had ever encountered. He stood at least 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His arms, visible beneath the rolled-up sleeves of his worn flannel shirt, were corded with muscles that spoke of years spent in hard labor and harder living. His chest was a barrel of solid strength, and his hands looked capable of breaking a man in two without much effort. He had dark hair that fell past his shoulders, wild and untamed like the mountains themselves, and a thick beard that could not hide the strong line of his jaw. His eyes, a startling shade of green that reminded Eleanor of pine trees after a rain, were fixed on the auctioneer with an intensity that made the smaller man take a step backward. "What did you just say to her?" The mountain man's voice was deep and rough, like gravel grinding beneath wagon wheels, but there was something protective in it that made Eleanor's breath catch. Silas Cunningham straightened his jacket, trying to regain his composure. "I beg your pardon, sir, but this is a legal proceeding. If you are not here to bid, then I must ask you to move along." The mountain man climbed onto the platform with surprising grace for someone so large. He moved like a predator, all controlled power and coiled strength. "I asked you a question. What did you say to this woman?" "I merely stated facts," Cunningham replied, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "She is being auctioned to settle her father's debts. If you wish to bid, the starting price is $500 for the property and the marriage contract." "I heard you mock her," the mountain man said quietly, and somehow that quiet was more terrifying than any shout could have been. I heard you laugh at her tears. Now see here, Cunningham began, raising his gavel as if to make a point. What happened next occurred so quickly that Eleanor almost missed it. The mountain man's hand shot out, grasping the gavel in midair. His massive fist closed around the wood, and with a twist of his wrist and a flex of those incredible forearms, he snapped the gavel clean in half. The crack of breaking wood echoed across the square like a gunshot, and the crowd fell into stunned silence. "You do not mock a woman's tears," the mountain man said, his voice still quiet but carrying to every corner of the square. "You do not shame someone for their appearance. And you sure as hell do not treat a human being like property to be joked about." Cunningham stared at the broken pieces of his gavel, his face going pale. "That was expensive mahogany. You will pay for that." "Add it to what I owe you," the mountain man replied. He turned to look at Eleanor for the first time, and she found herself unable to look away from those green eyes. There was kindness there, buried beneath layers of hard living and harder choices, but it was there nonetheless. "Miss, what is your name?" "Eleanor," she managed to say, her voice shaking. "Eleanor Whitmore." "Miss Whitmore, my name is Caleb Stone. I've been living in these mountains for the better part of 8 years, and I came down to town today to sell some furs and resupply. I did not expect to find this travesty taking place." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. "I want you to know that you have a choice in what happens next. These men may say otherwise, but you always have a choice." Eleanor felt fresh tears spring to her eyes, but these were different from the ones she had shed moments before. "The law says I must marry whoever pays my father's debts. If no one bids, I will be sent to a workhouse in Denver, and the property will be seized and sold separately." Caleb's jaw tightened, and she could see the muscles in his neck tense with barely controlled anger. "That is not law. That is cruelty dressed up in legal language." He turned back to Cunningham. "What is the total debt?" The auctioneer consulted his papers with shaking hands. $500 for the base property value, plus $327 in gambling debts, plus interest and fees, bringing the total to $915. "I will pay $1,000, Caleb said flatly, "on the condition that Miss Whitmore is freed from any obligation to marry against her will." Cunningham's eyes widened with greed, but he shook his head. The terms of the debt settlement specifically require marriage. The creditors were quite clear on that point. They want to ensure the property remains productive, and a woman alone cannot manage such a homestead. "That is absurd," Caleb growled. "That is the law in this territory," Cunningham countered, gaining confidence now that money was on the table. "If you wish to pay the debt, you must marry the woman. Those are the terms." Caleb stood silent for a long moment, and Eleanor could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he turned back to her, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way that seemed impossible for a man of his size and obvious strength. "Miss Whitmore, I want to make something very clear to you. If I pay this debt and we enter into a marriage contract, it will be in name only unless you decide otherwise. I have a cabin up in the high country, a good distance from here. You would be welcome to stay there, or you could remain on your father's property. I would ask nothing of you except that you be allowed to live your life in peace and dignity. When enough time has passed, if you wish to dissolve the marriage, I will not stand in your way." Eleanor stared at this strange mountain man who had appeared like an avenging angel when she needed one most. "Why would you do this for a stranger? Why would you spend so much money for someone you do not even know?" Caleb's expression softened, and for just a moment, she saw past the hard exterior to the man beneath. "Because 8 years ago, someone showed me kindness when I needed it most. Because I have seen too much cruelty in this world and not enough compassion. And because no one deserves to be treated the way this man treated you." He gestured at Cunningham without looking at him. "I have the money. I live a simple life, and I have been saving my earnings from trapping and hunting for years. I can afford this, and I can think of no better use for it than giving you back your freedom." "But you would be bound to me just as surely as I would be bound to you," Eleanor protested. "Why would you sacrifice your own freedom?" "I am already free, Miss Whitmore. I live in the mountains, answerable to no one but myself and the Almighty. A piece of paper will not change that. But for you, that piece of paper means the difference between slavery and liberty. That seems like a fair trade to me." Eleanor felt something crack open inside her chest. Some wall she had built around her heart to protect herself from the casual cruelties of the world. This man, this stranger with his mountain-wild appearance and his gentle words, was offering her a gift beyond price. Not just freedom from this immediate humiliation, but the promise of a life lived on her own terms. "I accept," she whispered, and then louder. "I accept your offer, Mr. Stone." Caleb nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and turned back to Cunningham. "Produce the papers. I want this done legally and binding so that no one can contest it later." The auctioneer scrambled to comply, spreading his documents across a small table that someone brought forward. The crowd had gone silent, watching this unexpected turn of events with rapt attention. Within the hour, papers had been signed, money had changed hands, and Eleanor found herself married to a man she had known for less than 2 hours. The ceremony itself was perfunctory, performed by a traveling preacher who happened to be in town. Caleb's hand was warm and calloused when he took hers to slip a simple gold band onto her finger. She had no idea where he had acquired it so quickly, until she noticed him quietly thanking the blacksmith's wife, who smiled and waved away his gratitude. The woman must have loaned or sold him her own spare ring. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Caleb did not try to kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and said, "You are safe now. I promise you that." The crowd dispersed slowly, many people looking disappointed that the entertainment had ended so anticlimactically. A few of the town's good women approached Eleanor with varying degrees of sympathy and curiosity, but she found herself unable to focus on their questions and comments. Her mind was reeling from the rapid turn her life had taken. Silas Cunningham packed his papers with angry, jerky movements, clearly displeased that his afternoon of cruel sport had been interrupted. As he prepared to leave, Caleb stepped into his path. "Mr. Cunningham," the mountain man said quietly, "I want you to know that if I ever hear of you conducting an auction like this again, I will come looking for you, and I will not be as civil as I was today." The auctioneer's face went white. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm making you a promise," Caleb replied. "There are laws that govern civilized society, and then there are laws that govern men's souls. You violated the latter today, and you should be grateful that I'm a man who believes in second chances. You will not get a third." Cunningham fled without another word, and Eleanor found herself alone with her new husband in the town square as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. "I imagine you have belongings you need to collect," Caleb said, his tone carefully neutral, as if he were addressing a skittish animal, "and decisions to make about what you want to do next." Eleanor nodded, finding her voice. "I have been staying at the boarding house since my father died. Everything I own fits in 2 trunks, and the homestead, I suppose I should see to it, though I have not been back since the funeral. I could not bear to be there alone." "We will face it together then," Caleb said simply. "If you wish to keep the property, we can make arrangements to ensure it is maintained. If you wish to sell it, that is also your choice. As I said, you are free to make your own decisions now." They walked together through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, and Eleanor was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. The mountain man and the obese woman, what a pair they made. She had heard the cruel nicknames people gave her when they thought she could not hear. She had endured the pitying looks from the women and the dismissive glances from the men her entire life. But walking beside Caleb, she felt something she had rarely experienced before. Protected. The boarding house was run by a stern widow named Mrs. Hemlock, who took Eleanor's money but made no secret of her disdain for her tenant. When Eleanor and Caleb arrived to collect her belongings, the older woman looked the mountain man up and down with obvious disapproval. "So you are the one who bought her," Mrs. Hemlock said bluntly. "I suppose you have your reasons, though I cannot fathom what they might be." "I married her," Caleb corrected, and there was steel in his voice. "And my reasons are my own. We have come for her belongings." Mrs. Hemlock sniffed, but led them upstairs to the small room Eleanor had occupied. It was sparse and cheerless, with barely enough space for a narrow bed and a washstand. Her 2 trunks sat in the corner, already packed in anticipation of this day. Caleb lifted both trunks as if they weighed nothing, muscles flexing beneath his shirt. "Is this everything?" "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "I do not have much." "Possessions are just things," Caleb replied. It is the person who matters, not what they own. They loaded the trunks onto a wagon that Caleb had apparently rented from the livery, and then they were traveling out of town toward the Whitmore homestead. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but Eleanor felt the weight of 1,000 unasked questions pressing against her tongue. Finally, she could bear it no longer. "Mr. Stone, why did you really do this? Please, I need to understand." Caleb kept his eyes on the road ahead, guiding the horses with practiced ease. "I told you the truth earlier. I've seen too much cruelty, and I wanted to stop it where I could." "But there must be more to it than that," Eleanor pressed. $1,000 is a fortune. You could have bought your own property, expanded your trapping operation, done anything with that money. Instead, you spent it on a stranger. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then, finally, he spoke. "8 years ago, I was a different man. I lived in St. Louis, worked as a blacksmith like my father before me. I was engaged to be married to a woman named Catherine. She was beautiful, refined, everything a man was supposed to want." He paused, and Eleanor could hear the old pain in his voice. "Then she met my business partner, a man with more money and better prospects. She broke our engagement 3 weeks before the wedding. Said she could not imagine being tied to a man who smelled of soot and had nothing but his muscles to offer the world." "I am sorry," Eleanor said softly. Caleb shrugged, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I was angry and hurt, and I made some bad decisions, got into fights, drank too much, nearly destroyed everything my father had built. Then one day, an old trapper came through town. He saw me at my lowest, and instead of judging me or walking away, he sat down and talked to me, told me about the mountains, about the freedom of living by your own rules, about finding peace in solitude." "He is the one who showed you kindness," Eleanor realized. "His name was Joshua Fletcher, and he saved my life without ever knowing it. He gave me a reason to leave St. Louis, to start over, to find out who I was when I was not trying to meet everyone else's expectations." Caleb finally turned to look at her, and his green eyes were intense. "When I saw you on that auction block, when I heard that man mocking you, I saw myself 8 years ago, someone broken by the world's cruelty, someone who needed a hand up instead of another blow. I had the power to help you, so I did. It is as simple and as complicated as that." Eleanor felt tears prickling her eyes again, but these were tears of gratitude rather than humiliation. "You are a good man, Caleb Stone, better than most I have known." "I am just a man," he replied quietly, "no better or worse than any other. I just try to do right when I can." They arrived at the Whitmore homestead as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The cabin was exactly as Eleanor remembered it. Sturdy logs chinked with mud, a stone chimney, a covered porch that faced the creek. 200 acres of good land stretched out around them, a mix of meadow and forest that had provided her father with everything they needed. It had never made them rich, but it had been home. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, his hands gentle despite their obvious strength. "Would you like me to come inside with you, or would you prefer a moment alone?" "Please come with me," Eleanor said, surprised by how much she meant it. "I do not think I can face it by myself just yet." Together, they entered the cabin. It was dusty from months of neglect, but otherwise unchanged. Her father's favorite chair still sat by the fireplace. The kitchen, where she had spent so many hours cooking and baking, was exactly as she had left it. Even his pipe was still on the mantel, as if he might walk through the door at any moment and light it up. Eleanor moved through the room slowly, touching familiar objects, remembering. Caleb followed at a respectful distance, carrying her trunks inside and setting them in the bedroom without comment. "I loved him," Eleanor said suddenly, standing in the middle of the main room. "Despite everything, despite his gambling and his foolish dreams, I loved my father. He was all I had, and he was not a bad man. He just made bad choices." "Most of us do at one time or another," Caleb replied. "The measure of a person is not in their mistakes, but in how they treat the people they love. And it is clear he loved you, even if he showed it imperfectly." Eleanor nodded, wiping at her eyes. "What happens now? You said I have choices, but I do not even know what questions to ask." Caleb moved to the fireplace and began building a fire with the ease of long practice. "The way I see it, you have several options. You can stay here on the homestead and work the land. I can help you with the heavy labor until you decide if you want to hire help or sell. You can come stay at my cabin in the high country, where you would be safe and provided for while you figure out what you want from life. Or we can make some other arrangement entirely. This is your life, Eleanor. For the first time in a long time, you get to decide how to live it. The use of her first name sent a small thrill through her, though she could not have explained why. What about you? What do you want? He looked up from the kindling he was arranging, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. I want you to be happy. I want you to have the freedom to discover who you are when you are not being judged by cruel people. Beyond that, I have no expectations. Eleanor sat down heavily in her father's chair, feeling the weight of the day finally catching up with her. I do not know how to be free. I have spent my entire life being told what I am and what I am not. Too fat, too plain, too much trouble. No one has ever asked me what I want before. Caleb finished with the fire and stood, brushing off his hands. Then that is where we start. Take your time. Think about what would make you happy. There is no rush, Eleanor. We have all the time in the world. They spent the evening in careful domesticity. Eleanor found herself in the kitchen almost by instinct, preparing a simple meal from the supplies Caleb had brought in his wagon. He had been planning to resupply in town, and he had enough provisions to feed them both for several days. She made biscuits and fried salt pork, heated beans, and brewed strong coffee. It felt good to cook again, to do something familiar and comforting. Caleb ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting her cooking in a way that seemed genuine rather than flattering. "These are the best biscuits I have had in 8 years," he said, reaching for a third one. "Light and fluffy. How did you manage that?" "My mother taught me before she died," Eleanor explained, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at his praise. "She said the secret was not to overwork the dough and to keep the butter cold. It is one of the few things I remember about her." "She taught you well," Caleb said. "I have been living on my own cooking for so long that I had forgotten food could actually taste this good." They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing more easily than Eleanor would have thought possible with a stranger. Caleb told her about his life in the mountains, about the cabin he had built with his own hands, about the rhythms of the seasons and the satisfaction of living simply. Eleanor found herself telling him things she had never shared with anyone. Her dreams of being more than just the fat daughter of a failed gambler, her love of reading the few books they owned, her secret wish to see more of the world beyond Redemption Creek. "You could do all of those things," Caleb said quietly when she finally fell silent. "There's nothing stopping you now. Except money and opportunity, and the fact that I am a woman alone in the world," Eleanor replied, but there was less bitterness in her voice than there might have been that morning. "You are not alone," Caleb corrected gently. "You have me, for whatever that is worth. And I may not have as much money as I did this morning, but I still have enough saved to help you pursue your dreams if that is what you want." Eleanor looked at this mountain man, this stranger who had become her husband, and felt something shift inside her. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because you deserve kindness," Caleb said simply, "and because I think, if you let yourself, you could be truly extraordinary." Those words stayed with Eleanor as she prepared for bed that night. Caleb insisted she take the bedroom while he made a pallet by the fireplace, despite her protests that he was far too large to be comfortable on the floor. She lay in her old bed, in her old room, wearing one of her sensible nightgowns, and stared at the ceiling. Her life had changed so dramatically in the course of a single day that she could barely process it all. She was married, she was free, she had choices. And she had a husband who looked at her with respect rather than contempt, who spoke to her as if her thoughts and feelings mattered, who had broken a gavel in half to defend her dignity. Sleep was a long time coming, but when it finally arrived, Eleanor dreamed not of the past but of possibilities she had never dared to imagine before. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Eleanor woke to the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly and emerged from the bedroom to find Caleb already up, fresh water drawn from the well, and a simple breakfast waiting. "I took the liberty of feeding the chickens and milking the cow," he said by way of greeting. "I hope you do not mind. I am used to rising with the sun, and I thought I might as well make myself useful." Eleanor stared at him, then at the breakfast, then back at him. "You milked Bessie? The brown cow with the white face?" "Yes, she seemed agreeable enough once I convinced her I knew what I was doing." Caleb poured her a cup of coffee. I thought we might spend today assessing the property, seeing what needs to be done to keep it running. Unless you have other plans? No, that sounds good, Eleanor said, accepting the coffee gratefully. I've been avoiding this place, but I suppose I cannot do that forever. They spent the day walking the property boundaries, checking fences, and making note of repairs that needed attention. Caleb worked tirelessly, his strength allowing him to accomplish tasks that would have taken Eleanor days to complete. He mended a broken gate, cleared fallen trees from the creek, and repaired a section of the cabin's roof that had begun to leak. All the while, he included Eleanor in every decision, asking her opinion and deferring to her wishes about her own property. It was a strange and wonderful experience for Eleanor, being treated as an equal partner rather than a burden. She found herself relaxing in Caleb's presence, laughing at his dry observations about the chickens' personalities, and sharing stories about growing up on the homestead. Your father may have made mistakes, Caleb said as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the mountains. But he raised you well. You are intelligent, capable, and strong. He should have been proud of you. He was, Eleanor said softly. He told me so often, especially near the end. I think he knew what was coming, what would happen after he died. He tried to apologize, but I could not bear to hear it. I just wanted him to get better. Caleb reached over and took her hand, the gesture so natural that neither of them remarked upon it. He is at peace now, and you are going to be fine. Better than fine, I think. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, calloused and strong. How can you be so sure? Because I see you, Eleanor Whitmore Stone, not what other people say you are, but who you actually are, and that person is remarkable. Something warm and fragile unfurled in Eleanor's chest, something she had thought long dead. Hope, she realized. She was feeling hope for the first time in years. The days turned into weeks, and a routine established itself. Caleb worked on the homestead during the day, making repairs and improvements that had been neglected during her father's long decline. Eleanor cooked and kept house, but she also found herself working alongside Caleb, learning skills her father had never taught her. He showed her how to mend fences properly, how to sharpen tools, how to read the weather in the clouds that gathered around the peaks. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk. Caleb proved to be surprisingly well-read for a mountain man. He had brought a small collection of books with him from his cabin, and he and Eleanor would take turns reading aloud by firelight. They discussed philosophy and poetry, argued good-naturedly about the meanings of different passages, and discovered a shared love of adventure stories. Eleanor found herself watching Caleb when he was not looking, admiring the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he worked, the concentration on his face when he was focused on a task, the gentleness in his hands despite their obvious strength. She tried to tell herself that these were simply observations, nothing more, but her heart knew better. She was falling in love with her husband. The realization terrified her. Caleb had been nothing but honorable in his treatment of her. He had kept his promise to give her space and freedom, never pushing for more than she was willing to give. They maintained separate sleeping arrangements, and he treated her with the respect due a partner rather than the presumption of a man toward his wife. But Eleanor found herself wanting more. She wanted to know what it would feel like to be held by those strong arms, to be kissed by that generous mouth, to be loved by a man who saw her as beautiful rather than burdensome. But how could she tell him that? What if he pitied her? What if his kindness was only that kindness and not the stirrings of deeper feeling? Eleanor had been rejected and mocked enough in her life. She did not think she could bear it if Caleb looked at her with pity rather than desire. So she kept her feelings locked away, treasuring the friendship they had built while longing for something more. Caleb, for his part, was fighting his own battle. He had not expected Eleanor to be so captivating. Her quick mind and sharp wit kept him constantly engaged. Her kindness toward the animals and her care for the land spoke to a gentle soul. And her laughter, when he could coax it from her, was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He found himself noticing things he had no right to notice, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the graceful movements of her hands when she worked, the curves of her body that others might judge but that he found utterly appealing. He wanted to tell her she was beautiful, that her size meant nothing to him except that there was more of her to admire, but he feared driving her away with unwanted advances. He had promised her freedom, and he would keep that promise even if it killed him, even if he wanted nothing more than to pull her into his arms and show her exactly how desirable he found her. The tension between them grew like a living thing, crackling in the air whenever they were close to each other. It came to a head on a warm afternoon in late August, nearly 6 weeks after their wedding. Eleanor had been baking bread, and the cabin was stifling with heat from the oven. She had tied her hair back and removed her apron, fanning herself with a folded newspaper as she waited for the loaves to finish. Caleb came in from the fields, his shirt soaked with sweat, his face flushed from exertion. "Storm coming," he announced. "A big one from the looks of those clouds. We should secure anything loose in the yard." They worked together quickly, bringing in tools and tying down what could not be moved. The sky had turned an ominous shade of green-gray, and the wind was picking up, carrying the smell of rain and ozone. They made it back inside just as the first drops began to fall. Within minutes, the storm was raging in full force, lightning cracking across the sky and thunder shaking the cabin's walls. Rain hammered against the roof like thousands of tiny fists, and the wind howled through the trees. Eleanor had always hated storms. They reminded her of the night her mother died, when lightning had struck a tree near the cabin and the thunder had drowned out her father's sobs. She found herself trembling, gripping the edge of the table as another brilliant flash lit up the room. "Eleanor?" Caleb's voice was concerned. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said automatically, but her voice shook and gave the lie to her words. Caleb crossed to her in 2 long strides. "You are afraid." "It is foolish," Eleanor said, hating the weakness but unable to stop her shaking. "I am a grown woman. I should not be afraid of a little thunder." "Fear is never foolish," Caleb said gently. "We all have things that frighten us." Without asking permission, he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest in a protective embrace. "You are safe. I promise you are safe." Eleanor stiffened for only a moment before melting into his warmth. He was solid and real and strong, and his arms felt like the safest place in the world. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and sure, beneath her ear. Smell the scent of him, clean sweat and pine, and something uniquely Caleb. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other as the storm raged outside. Gradually, Eleanor's fear faded, replaced by a different kind of tension. She became acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the warmth of his skin through the thin fabric of his shirt, of the way his hands spanned her back. She tilted her head up to look at him and found him already looking down at her. His green eyes were dark, with an emotion she was afraid to name, and his jaw was tight as if he were exercising tremendous control. "Caleb," she said softly, not even sure what she was asking. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice rough. "These past weeks with you have been the best of my life. I wake up every morning grateful for the chance to see your face, to hear your voice, to simply be near you. I know I promised to give you freedom, to ask nothing of you, but I am only human. And the truth is that I am falling in love with you. No, that is not right. I have already fallen. I'm in love with you, and I do not know what to do about it." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "You love me?" "How could I not?" Caleb asked, and there was such tenderness in his voice that it made her heart ache. "You are brilliant and kind and brave. You make me laugh. You challenge me to think differently. And you are so beautiful it sometimes hurts to look at you." "Beautiful?" Eleanor echoed, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Caleb, look at me. Really look at me. I am not beautiful. I am fat and plain and nothing special." Caleb's hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite their strength. "I am looking at you, Eleanor. I have been looking at you from the moment I saw you on that auction block. And I see a woman with eyes like warm honey, with a smile that lights up a room, with soft skin and gentle curves, and a body that is exactly as it should be. I see someone who is perfect in every way that matters." "How can you say that?" Eleanor asked, tears streaming down her face. "No one has ever thought I was beautiful. No one has ever wanted me." "Then they were fools," Caleb said fiercely. "Every last one of them. You are not too much, Eleanor. You are exactly enough, more than enough. You are everything." Eleanor stared up at this mountain man who had saved her, who had become her friend, who was now declaring his love with such conviction that she could not help but believe him. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, trying to protect myself from being hurt again, but I cannot help it. I love you, Caleb Stone." The smile that broke across Caleb's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. "Say it again." "I love you," Eleanor said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you, I love you, I love you." Caleb bent his head, moving slowly to give her time to pull away if she wanted, but Eleanor did not want to pull away. She rose on her toes, meeting him halfway, and when their lips finally touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then Caleb's arms tightened around her, and Eleanor's hands came up to tangle in his long hair, and the kiss deepened into something that made her toes curl and her heart race. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks." "I wish you had done it sooner," Eleanor admitted, feeling bold in a way she never had before. "I was trying to be honorable," Caleb said with a rueful laugh, "trying to give you space and time and all the things I thought you needed." "What I need is you," Eleanor said firmly. "I need you to kiss me again. I need you to hold me and love me and show me what it feels like to be wanted." "Eleanor," Caleb groaned, and there was a world of desire in that single word. "Are you sure? Because if we start this, I do not know if I will be able to stop, and I do not want you to have any regrets." "The only thing I regret is all the time we wasted," Eleanor replied. She took his hand and placed it over her heart where he could surely feel it pounding. "I am your wife, Caleb. Not in name only anymore, but in truth. Make me yours, please." The please seemed to undo the last of his control. Caleb swept her into his arms, carrying her to the bedroom as if she weighed nothing at all. He laid her on the bed with such care, such reverence, that Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes again. "You are crying," Caleb said, concern immediately replacing the desire in his expression. "Did I hurt you?" "No," Eleanor said, laughing through her tears. "I'm crying because I am happy, because you look at me like I am precious, because I never thought anyone would want me this way." Caleb stretched out beside her on the bed, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look down at her. "I want you in every way there is to want someone. I want your mind and your heart and your body. I want your mornings and your evenings and every moment in between. I want to wake up beside you every day for the rest of my life and fall asleep holding you every night." "Then take me," Eleanor whispered. "I am yours." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, a different kind of storm was building. Caleb kissed her again, his hands beginning to explore, learning the shape of her through her clothes. Eleanor responded with an eagerness that surprised them both, her own hands mapping the incredible muscles of his back and shoulders, feeling the power that lay coiled beneath his skin. They undressed each other slowly, between kisses and whispered words of love. Eleanor felt a moment of fear when she was finally bare before him, waiting for the look of disgust or disappointment, but it never came. Instead, Caleb looked at her with such hunger, such appreciation, that she felt beautiful for the first time in her life. "Perfect," he murmured, his hands skimming over her curves. "Absolutely perfect." What followed was a revelation. Caleb made love to her with a combination of strength and gentleness that left her breathless. He was patient and thorough, taking his time to learn what pleased her, introducing her to pleasures she had never imagined. And when they finally came together completely, Eleanor felt something click into place deep inside her soul, as if she had been waiting her entire life for this moment, for this man. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, limbs entwined, hearts still racing. Caleb held her close, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you," he said again, as if he could not say it enough. "My beautiful Eleanor, my wife, my everything." Eleanor snuggled closer, feeling safe and cherished and utterly content. "I love you too, more than I have words to express." Outside, the storm was finally beginning to fade, the thunder growing distant, the rain softening to a gentle patter. Inside, Eleanor and Caleb had weathered their own storm, and emerged on the other side, no longer two people bound by circumstance, but truly united in heart and body and soul. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Eleanor's life. She and Caleb settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked the homestead together during the days, and at night they explored the depths of their love for each other. Caleb was an attentive and passionate lover, and he took great delight in showing Eleanor all the ways her body could bring and receive pleasure. But it was not just the physical aspect of their relationship that flourished. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing their hopes and dreams and fears. Caleb told her more about his past, about his family in St. Louis and the pain of his broken engagement. Eleanor shared memories of her childhood, both the good times with her loving parents and the difficult years after her mother's death. "I want to take you to my cabin," Caleb said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I want to show you the high country, to share that part of my life with you." "I would like that," Eleanor said, leaning against his solid warmth. "When would we go?" "We could leave tomorrow if you wanted," Caleb replied. "The homestead is in good shape now, and fall is the most beautiful time in the mountains. We could spend a few weeks there, just the two of us, before the first snows come." The idea of being alone with Caleb in the wilderness, away from the town and its judgmental eyes, was immensely appealing. "Yes," Eleanor said decisively, "let us go tomorrow." They set out at dawn, Eleanor riding on a gentle mare that Caleb had acquired, while he led a pack horse loaded with supplies. The journey into the high country took 2 full days, following trails that grew progressively fainter until they disappeared altogether. Caleb navigated by landmarks and instinct, pointing out features of the landscape and telling stories about his years in the mountains. When they finally arrived at his cabin, Eleanor understood why he loved this place so much. It was built in a small meadow beside a crystal-clear stream, surrounded by towering pines and aspens that were just beginning to turn gold with the changing season. The cabin itself was small but beautifully crafted, every log fitted perfectly, every corner tight against the weather. It was clear that Caleb had built it with care and pride. "This is wonderful," Eleanor breathed, taking in the view of the surrounding peaks. "It is like something from a storybook." "It is peaceful," Caleb agreed. "Sometimes I would go weeks without seeing another soul, just me and the mountains and the wildlife." "Were you lonely?" Eleanor asked, turning to look at him. Caleb considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. But I thought loneliness was the price of freedom. I did not realize that you could have both freedom and companionship until I met you." They spent 3 glorious weeks in the mountain cabin, and it was a time of discovery and deepening love. Caleb taught Eleanor to fish in the icy stream and to recognize the tracks of the animals that passed through their meadow. She learned to appreciate the profound silence of the wilderness, broken only by the wind in the trees and the calls of birds. In turn, she taught Caleb that solitude was sweeter when shared with someone you loved. The nights were growing cold as September advanced, and they would huddle together under thick furs and blankets, making love by firelight and talking until sleep claimed them. Eleanor had never been happier or felt more alive than she did in those mountain nights, held safe in Caleb's arms. "I do not want to go back," she admitted one morning as they lay together watching the sun paint the peaks pink and gold. "I wish we could stay here forever." "We could," Caleb said thoughtfully. "If that is what you truly wanted, we could sell the homestead and live up here year-round. It is a hard life in winter, but we would be together." Eleanor considered it seriously. The idea had its appeal, certainly, but she also thought about the homestead, about the land her father had worked, about the life she could build there with Caleb by her side. "No," she said finally. "As much as I love it here, I think the homestead is where we belong, at least for now. We can always come back to visit." "That sounds like a good compromise," Caleb agreed, kissing her forehead. "We can have the best of both worlds, the homestead for most of the year, and the cabin as our retreat when we need to escape." They returned to the homestead in early October, just as the aspen trees were reaching their full golden glory. The cabin felt like a true home now, warmed by the love they had built within its walls. They fell back into their routine, but everything was different now, better, because they were facing it together as true partners. As winter approached, they prepared the homestead for the cold months ahead. Caleb chopped enough wood to last them through to spring, while Eleanor preserved vegetables from the garden and smoked meat for their stores. They worked side by side, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire, Eleanor often reading aloud while Caleb worked on various projects, carving or mending equipment. It was during one of these quiet evenings in late November that Eleanor realized she had not had her monthly courses since before their trip to the mountains. At first, she thought it was simply the change of season or the physical exertion of their wilderness adventure. But as the weeks passed and other signs began to appear, the truth became undeniable. She was carrying Caleb's child. The realization filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She wanted nothing more than to give Caleb children, to build a family with him. But she also remembered the story of her own mother's death in childbirth, and she could not help but fear that history might repeat itself. She waited until she was absolutely certain before telling him. They were in bed one night, Caleb's arms wrapped around her from behind, when she finally found the courage to speak. "Caleb, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" he asked, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. Eleanor turned in his arms so she could see his face. "I'm with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Caleb simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. "A baby? We are going to have a baby?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, and then she could not hold back the tears any longer. "I'm so happy and so scared at the same time. My mother died giving birth to my brother, who also did not survive. What if the same thing happens to me?" Caleb's arms tightened around her fiercely. "That will not happen. I will not let it happen. We will get the best midwife in the territory. I will take care of you every moment of every day. You and our child are going to be fine, Eleanor. I promise you that." "You cannot promise that," Eleanor said, but she wanted desperately to believe him. "I can and I do," Caleb insisted. "You are strong, Eleanor, stronger than you know, and I will be right beside you through all of it. We will face this together just like we face everything else." Over the following months, Caleb was true to his word. He arranged for a skilled midwife from Denver to come stay with them as Eleanor's time approached. He treated Eleanor like she was made of glass, insisting she rest and avoid heavy work, though she protested that pregnancy was not an illness. He read every book he could find on childbirth and infant care, determined to be prepared for any eventuality. Eleanor bloomed with pregnancy, her fears gradually giving way to excitement as she felt the baby move and grow within her. Caleb would spend hours with his hand on her swelling belly, marveling at every kick and flutter, talking to their unborn child about the mountains and the homestead and how much they were already loved. "Boy or girl?" he would ask, though he claimed not to care either way. "I think a boy," Eleanor would reply. "He kicks like a stubborn mule, just like his father." Spring came, and with it, the time of Eleanor's confinement. The midwife, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah Bennett, took up residence in the cabin and began her watchful waiting. When the pains finally began on a warm May afternoon, Eleanor felt her old fears resurface with a vengeance. "I cannot do this," she gasped as a contraction gripped her. "Caleb, I'm so afraid." Caleb was at her side instantly, his strong hand gripping hers. "You can do this. You are the strongest person I know, and I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah Bennett shooed him out of the room multiple times, insisting that childbirth was women's work, but Caleb refused to leave his wife's side. He held Eleanor's hand through every contraction, wiped her brow with cool cloths, and whispered words of encouragement and love. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Sarah's expression grew concerned, when Eleanor was so exhausted she thought she could not continue. But Caleb never wavered, never left her, his strength and faith carrying her through when her own threatened to fail. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, Eleanor gave one final tremendous push, and the cabin was filled with the lusty cry of a newborn baby. "A boy," Sarah announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A big, healthy boy." Eleanor collapsed back against the pillows, utterly spent but overwhelmed with relief and joy. Caleb's face was wet with tears as Sarah placed the cleaned and wrapped baby in Eleanor's arms. "Our son," Eleanor whispered, staring down at the tiny red face, the dark hair, the perfectly formed fingers that were already gripping at her nightgown. "Our beautiful son." Caleb leaned in close, his massive frame somehow gentle as he looked down at the child they had created together. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for this incredible gift." They named him Thomas after Eleanor's father, with the middle name Joshua, in honor of the old trapper who had set Caleb on his path to the mountains and, ultimately, to Eleanor. Thomas Joshua Stone announced his presence to the world with powerful lungs and an apparent determination to keep his parents from sleeping for more than a few hours at a time. Caleb proved to be a natural father, completely unafraid of the tiny infant. He would walk Thomas around the cabin for hours when the baby was fussy, his deep voice rumbling lullabies that Eleanor had never heard him sing before. He changed diapers without complaint and learned to warm milk to the exact temperature the baby preferred. And when he held his son in his massive hands, looking down at the infant with such love and wonder, Eleanor fell in love with him all over again. The first year of Thomas's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful discoveries. Eleanor and Caleb watched in amazement as their son grew and changed, reaching each new milestone. His first smile was for his father, which delighted Caleb to no end. His first word was "Mama," which made Eleanor cry happy tears. As Thomas approached his first birthday, Eleanor found herself pregnant again. This time, the news brought only joy, with none of the fear that had plagued her first pregnancy. She had survived childbirth once, and she would do it again. Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Sarah after Caleb's mother and the midwife who had helped them, was born in the spring of 1878. The birth was easier than Thomas's had been, and little Catherine was a calmer baby, content to sleep in her cradle and watch the world with wide gray eyes that matched her mother's. The cabin on the homestead, which had once seemed adequate for a single man and his wife, began to feel crowded with two active children. Caleb spent the summer of 1878 building an addition, expanding the cabin to include 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen for Eleanor's cooking. He worked with the same care and precision he had shown in building his mountain cabin, and the result was a home they could truly grow into. Life settled into a new rhythm, busy and chaotic and utterly fulfilling. Eleanor and Caleb worked the homestead together, with Thomas toddling along behind them on sturdy legs and Catherine riding in a sling against her mother's chest. They made occasional trips into Redemption Creek for supplies, and while Eleanor still encountered the occasional cruel stare or whispered comment, she found that she no longer cared. She had Caleb's love, her children's laughter, and a life that was richer than she had ever dreamed possible. Silas Cunningham, the auctioneer, had not returned to Redemption Creek after his encounter with Caleb. Word had spread about the mountain man who broke his gavel and paid $1,000 for a woman's freedom, and it had become something of a local legend. Some of the townspeople who had mocked Eleanor on that auction block now greeted her politely when she came to town, though whether out of respect or fear of her formidable husband, Eleanor neither knew nor cared. The homestead prospered under their joint management. Caleb's strength and Eleanor's organizational skills proved to be an unbeatable combination. They expanded the livestock, improved the land, and became known throughout the region for the quality of their beef and the productivity of their acres. Money, which had once been a source of anxiety, became simply a tool they used to build the life they wanted. When Thomas was 4 and Catherine was 2, Eleanor gave birth to their third child, another son they named Joshua Fletcher Stone, after the man who had saved Caleb all those years ago. Young Joshua was a perfect blend of his parents, with his father's green eyes and his mother's gentle disposition. The years passed, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, illnesses and accidents, the normal trials of life on a frontier homestead. But through it all, Eleanor and Caleb faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing season. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Eleanor back to the mountain cabin, leaving the children in the capable care of Sarah Bennett, who had become something of an honorary grandmother to the Stone children. It was late summer, and the meadow was carpeted with wildflowers. They stood together in the place where they had first truly become husband and wife, and Caleb took Eleanor's hands in his. 10 years ago, I walked into a town square and saw a woman being humiliated by a cruel man. I thought I was saving you that day, but the truth is, you saved me. You gave me a reason to come down from my mountain. You gave me a family and a home and a love I never thought I would find. You made me whole, Eleanor." Eleanor smiled up at her husband, her mountain man, the love of her life. "We saved each other, I think. You showed me that I was worthy of love, that my value was not determined by other people's judgments. You gave me freedom, and then you gave me your heart, and I would go through everything again, every moment of pain and humiliation, if it meant ending up here with you." They made love in the mountain cabin that night, with the same passion and tenderness they had shared on that stormy afternoon so many years before. And in the morning, they began the journey back to the homestead, back to their children, back to the life they had built together. Eleanor and Caleb had 3 more children over the following years, another daughter named Mary, and twins, a boy and girl they named Jacob and Rose. The cabin had to be expanded again to accommodate their growing family, and Caleb built a second story, creating enough bedrooms for all their children. The homestead became a lively, noisy place, filled with the laughter and occasional tears of childhood. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved books and learning, much like his mother. Catherine was adventurous and bold, always climbing trees and exploring the creek. Joshua was gentle and kind, often found caring for injured animals he discovered. The younger children brought their own personalities to the family dynamic, creating a tapestry of different temperaments and talents. Eleanor homeschooled all the children, using the books Caleb continued to acquire for their growing library. She taught them reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also practical skills like cooking, sewing, and managing a household. Caleb taught them to ride, to hunt, to survive in the wilderness, and to treat all people with dignity and respect. "Remember," he would tell them, "a person's worth is not in how they look or how much money they have. It is in how they treat others, especially those who cannot defend themselves." The story of how their parents met became something of a legend among the Stone children. They loved to hear about the auction, about Caleb breaking the gavel in half, about standing up to the cruel auctioneer. It became a lesson they carried with them: always defend those who cannot defend themselves, always choose kindness over cruelty. As the children grew older, Eleanor and Caleb watched with pride as they developed into fine young people. Thomas announced his intention to become a teacher, wanting to bring education to the frontier towns that had none. Catherine declared she would be a rancher, taking over the homestead when her parents were ready to retire. Joshua found his calling as a healer, apprenticing with the doctor in Redemption Creek. The younger children were still finding their paths, but Eleanor had no doubt they would find their places in the world. She and Caleb had given them the greatest gifts they could: unconditional love, solid values, and the freedom to become whoever they were meant to be. On a crisp autumn evening in 1891, Eleanor and Caleb sat on their porch, watching the sunset over the mountains. Their children were scattered around the property, the older ones helping with evening chores, the younger ones playing by the creek. The sound of their laughter drifted up to the cabin on the evening breeze. "Do you ever think about that day?" Eleanor asked, reaching for Caleb's hand. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Caleb admitted, "though it feels like it happened to different people in a different life. We have come so far from that moment." "You saved me that day," Eleanor said softly. "In every way a person can be saved." Caleb brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "And you gave me a reason to live instead of just exist. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. I would spend that $1,000 again every single day if it meant having you in my life." Eleanor leaned her head against his broad shoulder, feeling the same sense of safety and love she had felt on that stormy afternoon 15 years ago. They had built a good life together, she and her mountain man. A life filled with love and laughter, hard work and simple pleasures, challenges overcome and dreams fulfilled. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and constants in equal measure. Redemption Creek grew from a rough mining town into a proper community with a church, a school, and even a library that Thomas helped establish when he returned from his teacher training in Denver. The wild frontier was slowly being tamed, though the mountains remained as wild and beautiful as ever. Eleanor and Caleb grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with the evidence of years spent laughing and living. But their love never faded. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming as much a part of them as breathing. Their children married and had children of their own, and the homestead that Thomas Whitmore had nearly gambled away became the center of a sprawling family. Catherine and her husband took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, while Thomas built a schoolhouse on the far corner of the property and taught the children of the region. Joshua opened a medical practice in town, but visited the homestead frequently to check on his aging parents. Eleanor and Caleb became beloved grandparents, telling stories to wide-eyed children about the old days, about mountain lions and blizzards, about the time Grandpa broke a gavel in half to defend Grandma's honor. The story lost nothing in the retelling, and it instilled in each new generation the importance of standing up for what was right. On a spring morning in 1899, Eleanor woke to find Caleb already up, standing at the window of their bedroom and looking out at the mountains. At 68, he was still strong, still capable, though he moved a bit slower than he once had. His hair was completely white now, and his beard was shot through with silver, but to Eleanor, he was as handsome as the day she first saw him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, joining him at the window. "I am thinking about how blessed I have been," Caleb replied, slipping an arm around her waist. 23 years ago, I came down from my mountain planning to buy supplies and go back to my solitary life. Instead, I found you. I found everything I did not even know I was looking for." Eleanor leaned into his warmth, as comfortable with him now as she had been nervous all those years ago. "We found each other, and we built something beautiful together." "We did," Caleb agreed. "A family, a legacy, a love that will outlast us both." They stood together in the morning light, watching as their grandchildren played in the yard below, as their daughter directed ranch hands, as the smoke rose from Thomas's schoolhouse chimney. This was their legacy, Eleanor thought, not just the land or the buildings, but the family they had created, the values they had instilled, the love they had shared and passed on to the next generation. That summer, the entire Stone family gathered at the homestead for a massive celebration. It was Eleanor and Caleb's 25th wedding anniversary, and their children had planned a party that would rival any society event in Denver. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, filling the expanded cabin and spilling out into the yard. Someone had even tracked down Sarah Bennett, the midwife, who had delivered 3 of the Stone children and become a dear family friend. She was elderly now, her hands gnarled with age, but her eyes were still sharp and her wit as quick as ever. "I knew from the moment I met you two that you would go the distance," Sarah said, clasping Eleanor's hand. "The way that mountain man looked at you, like you hung the moon and stars, and the way you looked at him, like he was a hero from one of your books, that kind of love does not fade." "It only grows stronger," Eleanor agreed, looking across the yard to where Caleb was surrounded by grandchildren, all of them clamoring for his attention. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, Caleb stood and called for everyone's attention. The crowd quieted, and he reached for Eleanor's hand, drawing her up beside him. 25 years ago, I made the best decision of my life," Caleb announced to the gathered assembly. "I spent $1,000 to free a woman I did not know from a terrible situation. But the truth is, I did not buy her freedom that day. I bought my own. Eleanor freed me from loneliness, from bitterness, from a half-life spent hiding in the mountains. She gave me everything worth having: love, family, purpose, joy." He turned to look at Eleanor, and his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You are my heart, Eleanor Stone. You have been from that very first day, and you will be until my last breath and beyond. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you, renewed on this anniversary and every day for the rest of our lives." Eleanor could not speak past the lump in her throat, so she simply rose on her toes and kissed her husband to the cheers and applause of their family and friends. When they finally broke apart, she managed to whisper, "I love you too, always and forever." The party continued late into the night, but Eleanor and Caleb slipped away early, seeking the quiet of the porch and each other's company. They sat together in the old rocking chairs Caleb had built years ago, holding hands and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you remember the first night we spent here?" Eleanor asked. "After the auction." "I remember everything about that day," Caleb replied. "The way you looked on that auction block, so brave even though you were terrified. The way that gavel felt when I snapped it in two. The way you said my name the first time, like you could not quite believe I was real." "I could not," Eleanor admitted. "Men like you did not exist in my world. Men who stood up for women, who treated them as equals, who saw past the surface to the person underneath. You were like something out of a dream." "And you were the reality I did not know I needed," Caleb said. "You grounded me, Eleanor. You brought me back to the world of the living. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. After you, I was finally alive." They rocked in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the homestead, the lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the distant laughter of their grown children inside the cabin. "Caleb," Eleanor said eventually, "if you could go back and change anything about our life together, would you?" He did not even hesitate. "Not a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, brought us to where we are now. And where we are now is exactly where I want to be." Eleanor smiled, squeezing his hand. "That is the right answer." As the years advanced into the new century, Eleanor and Caleb gradually stepped back from the day-to-day work of the homestead. Catherine and her husband took over completely, running the ranch with the same dedication and care that Eleanor and Caleb had shown. This freed Eleanor and Caleb to enjoy their grandchildren, to take trips back to the mountain cabin, and to simply savor the quiet pleasure of each other's company. They were sitting on the porch one afternoon in the autumn of 1904 when a stranger rode up to the homestead. He was an older man, well-dressed with an air of city sophistication that immediately set him apart from the usual ranch hands and neighbors who visited. "Can I help you?" Caleb called out, rising from his chair with the caution of someone who had lived through rough times. The stranger dismounted and removed his hat. "I am looking for Caleb Stone. I was told I might find him here." "I am Caleb Stone," Caleb replied. "And you are?" "My name is Richard Cunningham," the man said, and Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "I believe you knew my father, Silas Cunningham." Caleb's expression hardened. "I knew him. If you have come seeking retribution for a broken gavel, you can save your breath and ride on." "No, no," Richard said quickly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I did not come for that. I came to thank you." "Thank me?" Caleb echoed, clearly confused. Richard took a deep breath. "My father was not a good man, Mr. Stone. He was cruel and greedy, and he took pleasure in other people's suffering. What you did that day in Redemption Creek, standing up to him, breaking his gavel, it shook him. For the first time in his life, someone had held him accountable for his cruelty. It changed him." Eleanor stood and moved to Caleb's side, taking his hand. "How did it change him?" "He spent the rest of his life trying to make amends," Richard explained. "He stopped conducting those terrible auctions. He started working with charitable organizations, helping women and children in need. He was never warm or particularly kind, but he stopped being actively cruel. And when he died last year, he left instructions in his will that I was to find you and thank you for showing him that there were consequences for treating people badly." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "I did not do it to change him. I did it to protect my wife." "I know," Richard said, "but you changed him anyway, and in doing so, you saved others from the suffering he might have caused. I thought you should know that your actions had ripples far beyond that single day." After Richard left, Eleanor and Caleb sat back down on the porch, both of them quiet and thoughtful. "I never expected that," Caleb finally said. "I thought that man was beyond redemption." "Maybe no one is beyond redemption if they truly want to change," Eleanor mused, "though I am glad we never had to see him again to find out." "Agreed," Caleb said, pulling her close. "But it is a good reminder, I think. Our actions matter. The choices we make, the stands we take, they have consequences we may never see or understand. All we can do is try to do right and hope for the best." Eleanor settled against his shoulder, marveling once again at the wisdom of this mountain man she had married. "You always did know how to do right, Caleb Stone, from that very first day." The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Eleanor and Caleb continued to age gracefully together. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th, surrounded by an ever-growing family. Their children gave them more than 20 grandchildren, and those grandchildren began having children of their own, making Eleanor and Caleb great-grandparents. The homestead remained a gathering place for the Stone family, a touchstone where multiple generations would come together to celebrate holidays and special occasions. And always, the story of how Grandma and Grandpa met was told and retold, a legend that defined the family's values of standing up for the vulnerable and choosing love over judgment. In the spring of 1908, Caleb suffered a minor heart episode that scared everyone, Eleanor most of all. He recovered, but it was a reminder that they were not immortal, that their time together, however blessed it had been, was finite. "I am not ready to lose you," Eleanor told him as he recovered in their bed, surrounded by worried children and grandchildren. "You're not going to lose me yet," Caleb assured her, though his voice was weaker than she was used to hearing. "I still have too much living to do. I want to see you at 40 years of marriage. I want to meet more great-grandchildren. I want to watch the sun set from our porch at least 1,000 more times." "Then you had better rest and get strong again," Eleanor said firmly, though her eyes were wet with tears. Caleb did recover, though he was never quite as strong as he had been before. But he still insisted on taking Eleanor back to the mountain cabin that summer, declaring that he had made her a promise 32 years ago, and he intended to keep it. They spent a month in the high country, just the two of them, reliving memories and making new ones. Caleb moved slower than he once had, and Eleanor's joints ached with the arthritis that plagued her, but they still walked hand in hand through the meadow, still talked long into the night, still made love with the tenderness of long practice and deep affection. "This has been a good life," Caleb said one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge, "better than I ever dreamed possible." "The best life," Eleanor agreed. "I would not change a single moment." They returned to the homestead in early fall, and life resumed its normal rhythm. Caleb's health remained stable, and Eleanor began to hope that they might have many more years together. She should have known better than to take anything for granted. On a crisp October morning in 1909, Caleb woke early, as was his habit. Eleanor felt him kiss her forehead before he slipped out of bed, heard him moving around the room as he dressed. She drowsed contentedly, planning to rise in a few minutes and start breakfast. But when those few minutes passed and she ventured out to the main room, she found Caleb sitting in his favorite chair by the fireplace, his face peaceful, his eyes closed. He had simply sat down and slipped away, his heart finally giving out after 78 years of hard living and deep loving. Eleanor's cry of anguish brought the entire household running, and within hours the whole family had gathered. They surrounded Eleanor with love and support, but nothing could fill the gaping hole that Caleb's death had left in her heart. The funeral was held at the homestead, and it seemed like half the territory turned out to pay their respects to the mountain man who had become a legend. Stories were shared about his strength, his integrity, his deep love for his wife and family. Eleanor sat through it all in a daze, unable to quite accept that Caleb was really gone. In the days and weeks that followed, Eleanor found herself moving through the motions of life without really living. She ate because her children insisted, slept because exhaustion finally claimed her, but she felt like half of herself had been torn away. After 33 years of partnership, of sharing everything, the world seemed colorless and empty without Caleb. It was her youngest granddaughter, little Rose, who finally broke through her grief. The child climbed into Eleanor's lap one afternoon and said, "Grandma, why are you so sad? Grandpa is not gone. He is right here." She tapped Eleanor's chest, right over her heart. "He is in here, and he would not want you to be so sad." Eleanor looked down at this wise child and felt something shift inside her. Caleb would not want her to waste away in grief. He would want her to live, to enjoy the family they had created, to find joy where she could. He had given her freedom once, and she would honor his memory by using that freedom to live fully until they could be together again. Slowly, painfully, Eleanor began to heal. She would never stop missing Caleb, never stop wishing he was still by her side, but she learned to carry the grief alongside the love, to remember him with smiles as well as tears. She threw herself into her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their remarkable grandfather, ensuring that his legacy of strength and compassion lived on. Eleanor lived for another 7 years after Caleb's death, years filled with family and love, and the satisfaction of seeing the Stone legacy continue to grow. She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1916 at the age of 64, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Caleb had created. They buried her next to Caleb on a hill overlooking the homestead, where the mountains stood eternal in the distance and the creek sang its endless song. The entire Stone family gathered for the funeral, more than 70 people who owed their existence to the love between a mountain man and the woman he had saved from an auction block. Thomas, now a respected educator with gray in his hair, stood to give the eulogy. "Our mother and father built something remarkable together," he told the assembled mourners. "They built it on a foundation of love and respect, of standing up for what is right even when it is hard, of treating every person with dignity regardless of how the world judges them. They taught us that a person's worth is not in their appearance or their possessions, but in their character and their choices." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces, the family that had grown from the union of 2 people who had every reason to give up on love, but chose hope instead. They showed us what it means to truly love someone, to commit to another person not just in the easy times, but through all of life's challenges. They showed us that real beauty is found in kindness, real strength in gentleness, real courage in vulnerability. And they showed us that one person's choice to do right, to stand up against cruelty, to offer compassion instead of judgment, can change not just one life, but generations. Catherine stood next, her voice strong despite her tears. "I asked my father once why he saved my mother that day at the auction. He told me he did it because someone had shown him kindness when he needed it most, and he wanted to pass that gift along. He said, 'Kindness is never wasted, that every act of compassion creates ripples that spread farther than we can imagine.' Our parents' kindness to each other, their love, their commitment, those ripples have spread to all of us and beyond. We carry them forward in how we treat each other, in how we raise our children, in how we move through the world." The funeral concluded, and gradually the mourners dispersed until only the immediate Stone family remained on the hillside. They stood together in the fading light, looking at the 2 simple headstones that marked the graves of Eleanor and Caleb Stone. The youngest great-grandchild, a girl of 4 named Eleanor after her great-grandmother, picked a handful of wildflowers and laid them on the graves. "Great-grandma and great-grandpa are together again," she announced with the certainty of childhood. "They are probably sitting on their porch in heaven, watching the sunset and holding hands." Her mother smiled through her tears. "I think you are absolutely right, sweetheart." And perhaps she was. Perhaps somewhere beyond the veil of mortality, Eleanor and Caleb Stone were indeed together again, young and strong and whole, ready to begin a new adventure in whatever came next. Perhaps they were walking hand in hand through endless meadows, or sitting on a porch watching eternal sunsets, or simply holding each other close and marveling at the beautiful life they had built together. The homestead continued to thrive under Catherine's management and eventually passed to her children and grandchildren. The mountain cabin remained a family retreat, a place where Stone descendants could go to reconnect with their roots and remember the remarkable love story that had started their family line. The story of the auction, of the broken gavel, of the mountain man who stood up to cruelty and won, became legend not just in the Stone family, but throughout the region. Decades later, a great-great-granddaughter of Eleanor and Caleb Stone would write a book about their love story, preserving it for future generations. She would spend years researching, interviewing elderly relatives who remembered the original couple, digging through old letters and journals that Eleanor had kept throughout her life. In one of those journals, dated just a few weeks before Eleanor's death, she found an entry that brought tears to her eyes. "I am an old woman now, and my time is short. Soon I will join my beloved Caleb, and I confess I look forward to that reunion more than I fear what comes between. But before I go, I want to record this thought for my children and grandchildren and all who come after. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. It can transform lives, heal wounds, and create miracles. I was a woman the world had deemed worthless, standing on an auction block while cruel people laughed at my tears. And then a mountain man broke a gavel in half and showed me that I was precious. He loved me, not despite who I was, but because of it. He saw beauty where others saw only flaws, strength where others saw only weakness, worth where others saw only burden. That love saved me, transformed me, and gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. If I could give one gift to all who come after me, it would be this: love courageously, love generously, love without conditions or reservations. Stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves. See people not as the world judges them, but as they truly are. And when you find a love worth having, fight for it with everything you have. That is how you build a legacy that endures. The great-great-granddaughter closed the journal carefully, her vision blurred with tears. Eleanor and Caleb Stone had indeed built a legacy that endured, one that continued to inspire and guide their descendants more than a century after that fateful day in Redemption Creek. The homestead still stood, expanded and modernized, but recognizable as the place where a great love had flourished. The mountain cabin had been carefully preserved as a historic site, maintained by the Stone Family Trust. And in Redemption Creek, now a thriving small city, a statue stood in the town square, commemorating the day a mountain man had broken a gavel in half and changed the course of countless lives. The inscription on the statue read simply, "In memory of Caleb and Eleanor Stone, who showed us that love is always worth fighting for, and that one person's courage can change the world." And so the story lived on, passed from generation to generation, a testament to the transformative power of love, the importance of standing up for what is right, and the truth that every person, regardless of how the world judges them, has inherent worth and dignity. It was a story that began with tears and laughter on an auction block, continued through years of joy and challenge, and ended only to begin again in the hearts of all who heard it and took its lessons to heart. Eleanor and Caleb Stone had lived and loved and left the world a better place than they found it. And in the end, is that not the truest measure of a life well lived? Their love story, born in one of humanity's darkest moments, but transformed into something beautiful and enduring, would continue to inspire, as long as there were people willing to choose compassion over cruelty, courage over cowardice, and love over hate. The mountain man and the woman from the auction block had become immortal, not through wealth or fame or power, but through the simple, extraordinary act of loving each other well and passing that love on to everyone their lives touched. And that, perhaps, is the greatest legacy anyone could hope to leave behind.